Real Estate Talk discusses the ins and outs of our local housing industry, sponsored by Keller Williams Spokane.
Hello, thanks for joining us today. My name is Rick Flann. I'm the CEO and team leader at Keller Williams in Spokane. And today we're going to be talking about how to write a winning offer. And we have three incredible guests with us today. Ken Sax, the designated broker of Keller Williams Spokane. We have Marc Nilson from Navigators Northwest. We have Tanya Tyler with Keller Williams as an incredible individual agent. And so, we're in a hyper-competitive market. We've talked here and how we've had people who've written 7 offers come in, 23 offers come in. And so what we're looking at today is how do you actually win in a hyper-competitive market when it comes to writing offers on a more nitty-gritty, detailed structure when it comes to actually, as agents, how do we put together the most compelling proposition to a seller that's possible? And so as we were looking at some things and talking ahead of time, there were some specific parts to discuss that could be valuable. And so first off, kind of the most obvious one is price, right? There are some people in this market where it's just whoever offers the highest price, that's who they're going to accept. And yet that's not always the case. Mm-mm. And so maybe to just start us out, I'd say, what have you seen most often has been the most accepted offer that's not just directly tied to price? So Ken, maybe we'll start with you on that.
Sure. Financing comes to mind. And how is the buyer planning on buying the property? Is it cash? Good luck competing against a cash buyer. Is it, an FHA loan, a VA loan, a conventional loan? But financing, because a seller wants to go with the buyer that is most likely able to perform and buy the house. And I've seen, for a couple of years now, a lot of buyers, it's tough to compete with a cash buyer, because with a cash buyer, oftentimes we have no appraisal. And in an appreciating market, I always say appraisers, they look out the back window, and realtors, we look out the front window. Mm-hmm. So if the market's appreciating and we go under contract at this, well, the appraiser's looking at what has sold in the past. That may not be today's value of today's market. And so if we have a buyer who now doesn't have to have an appraisal done, tough to beat.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that might be the situation where actually price may come into play. If you have a seller who is saying, hey, I'm willing to risk it to get a higher offer that's with a loan, how have you experienced where someone actually could beat out a cash offer? I know that's a tough one, right? Maybe a bit of a unicorn even, and yet in a competing market, there have been times where a cash offer hasn't come in.
Sure.
In the winning slot. And so what are some ways possibly that could be addressed that could help a buyer?
Well, things that stand out for me would be a large down payment, because that is a sign that the buyer has some money. And a large down payment, so a smaller loan amount, it's more likely that buyer's going to get the loan when they're just looking to borrow a little bit of the price of the house versus the entire price of the house. So down payment means a lot to me.
Okay. What else?
I'm with you. We hear cash is king. I think that it depends. I know that a lot of cash buyers right now are coming in slightly a little lower because they do have cash. So they're thinking that cash is going to be king. So they're just kind of doing a little bit of a low ball. I have a couple cash buyers. They're doing the same, hey, I've got cash. We can skip the appraisal. This house is probably overpriced anyway. But what's happening is, I think that I've spoken to a couple of the agents, and they said, I would rather have a conventional and wait another 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks to get 10,000, 15,000 below. So I think just making sure that cash buyer is coming in at the right price, but that's kind of one of the things where cash would not win.
Right. Agreed.
If it was low.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah, we've had sellers say, well, when it closes, the money spends the same, right? And then it's back to the conversation of what's most likely, what's going to be the smoothest transaction and what's most likely to close.
Yep. Well, and how has it worked as well when it comes to having a cash buyer? There have been times in the past for me where the cash offer comes in, and yet there's been a sense almost where they're more flippant. And there's been times where they've walked away versus maybe a conventional offer where they have a large down payment. They've had 4 offers not accepted. And for them, after they pay for the appraisal, after they go through this process, they're actually a little more sticky to that home. That's some things that I've seen as well. So it goes back to maybe our previous conversation of communication, right? Where who is it? What's going on? And being able to really play an even deck there. So, okay, well, good. Anything else on the price? Kind of the most obvious one. Cash is king, and yet there's some potential opportunity there if you're not a cash buyer. Anything else on that part?
No, just a reasonable close date, a reasonable amount of earnest money, or above a reasonable amount of earnest money, large down payment. Those are the things.
Yeah, well, maybe let's dive into that a little bit. So in terms of earnest money, are you seeing any particular amount percentage-wise that seems to make much of a difference in an offer?
Yeah, in that competing offers situation we were just talking about, we had, it was either 17 or 15 offers, 2 pulled out, but we had some offers that came in with $500 earnest money. And it's just not enough for a seller to pull their house off the market, be legally bound in a contract, wait out that time frame, and that's all that they get for liquidated damages. So yeah, I think earnest money is a big factor. It's also scary when there's a really big earnest money, because typically a buyer is not going to let go of that as easy as they are what might be considered a traditional or a standard or norm in our community. So, you know, we're seeing a lot of 1%. And then if someone wants to get competitive, usually it goes up from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm typically 1% in my buyer's meeting. Just say you're going to be sitting at a 1%. Could go a little higher, maybe a couple dollars lower, but 1%.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Good. What about when it comes to an escalation clause? Right. So you have your earnest money, and then you have 15 offers, 17 offers.
Right.
I know some agents just don't play the escalation game. Other ones, that's all they do. So as you've experienced that, what are some best practices that you've seen?
So I think it's important to explain what an escalation clause is to our listeners. And so an escalation clause coming from a buyer says, let's say the house is $250,000. I will pay $250,000 for your house, or $500, let's say, over the highest price, not to exceed $270,000. So that's an escalation clause. In using an escalation clause, I always tell buyer brokers, you better explain the risks to your buyer when you use an escalation clause. Because if I'm a seller and I get an escalation clause showing that you will escalate up to a max of $275,000, now the form itself says that we need a bona fide written offer to allow that escalation. But how it can be used against you, buyer, is whether or not I have any offers or not. You already told me you'd pay $275,000 for the house. What would stop me from countering and saying, buyer and seller, remove the escalation clause from the contract, and we counter at $275,000. You already said you'd pay it. That's the risk that buyer brokers have to explain to their buyers. It can be used against them.
And I'm going to go back to Annie Fitzsimmons has a couple videos on YouTube that are awesome about the 35E and the massive risks that are involved. So essentially she says, please don't use them. But I know you're going to use them. So when you do, pull them back out. So remove them. So I think that if anybody is a realtor in this market today, they need to hop on YouTube, watch those videos, because you're really subjecting, whether you're representing the buyer or the seller, to some massive risks. Because the default language in that contract is if someone makes a mistake, right at closing, that mistake can be corrected. And your seller's got to eat it, and who's the seller's going to look to? Or your buyer maybe doesn't get it, you know, whatever that is. So the form is I don't know if rot's the right word, but it's there's a lot of errors that can be made, and it's widely misinterpreted. It's a good idea to use it if your buyers want it, but ultimately explain to the other agent, hey, we want a counteroffer form with the final terms of the price, and we're going to remove that form from the contract.
Yeah, we're not going to rely on the escalation addendum to control the price. We can use it in arriving at the price, but ultimately, Mark, what you're saying, and you're spot on, you want to remove it from the contract, and you're going to rely on a counteroffer addendum, which it says purchase price, whatever that is. Hard to argue that.
Right.
But we've seen litigation over the years over that escalation addendum because, look, we could have one right now. We're not all going to agree on it.
Right.
And that's the problem with these things.
So let's go on to something. So you're going to remove it. So let's say that you're using it as a buyer broker. You're the list agent. Okay. You're going to counter him the 275, the example we just used earlier, and you're going to write on the counter, remove it from
Buyer and seller agree, Form
Right.
35E, which is the form number of
Right.
the escalation addendum, is
Remove it.
hereby removed from the contract.
now new price or price 275.
275. If you want it, sign it.
So now it's been removed from the contract. Now he has the choice, just to clarify, he has the choice to say, well, we'll come back at 272.
Sure.
Because now it's not in play at all.
It's a counteroffer.
Yeah,
So
it's
now
a
we're just
counter.
at just a basic counter offer. So that's what you're saying is remove when it's being removed. Now we're just in open 5,000 negotiation. Kind of get there.
Yeah, and it's like Ken always says, our phone texts, but it also calls. And that phone call of, hey, I'm sitting down, reviewing offers, rather than using this escalation clause, we're going to send a counter. Is this agreeable? Then maybe they say no, and then you move on to a different strategy. But
Are you saying communication, Mark?
That's it.
So weird.
That
That's it,
common
yes.
word.
Right.
Interesting.
No, you're right. I mean, that communication, what we do is so huge. And if you're not a good communicator as an agent, man, you're just really not doing a good service to yourself and to
Right.
your clients. But yeah, you're so right on that.
Well, and what's I'm seeing highlighted, and I'm sure will continue to be, is it's good communication, and it's also being knowledgeable of contracts, right? To write a powerful offer
Yeah.
that's more likely to be accepted, it comes from communication, and it comes back to, do you know what the heck you're doing?
Exactly.
Because when you have 15 to 17 offers, 23 offers, 8 offers, 2 offers, if you have a contract that looks like garbage versus one that's well put together with the right documentation, it speaks very loudly.
yeah, and there is a fine line there with maybe coaching a listing agent when you're in multiple offers and you're coaching them on that 35E and how you're going to remove it. Shoot, if you've got the wrong agent on the other side of that, or if you present that in the wrong way, you could be shooting yourself in the foot. So I think just being pleasant, knowing you're on the same team, communicating well on that front is going to be really helpful too.
Well, and this is very obvious, and yet what you just highlighted there, Mark, was the idea of we're on the same team.
Yeah.
Sometimes in this market and in this industry, there's this tendency to have, not among many, but a combative sense or a desperate sense, which can bring out those emotions. So how important is that to make sure that we're the calm, cool, collected leader in the process?
Oh man, I always tell my agents that same thing is it's our job to make sure our buyers like the sellers. I'm the buyer's agent because what a bad feeling when you buy some jerk's house and you're moving in and that transaction didn't go smooth. That has nothing to do with numbers. It's all that feeling that you want to create this great positive feeling all the way through. So that's a fine balance too, is like trying to maybe share the other side but not make them a jerk and still have your clients feel like you're representing them. But man, that's part of our job. It's not a science. It's an art. How do you make everybody feel good throughout the process? Because you're going to do another cross sale with that agent.
Yeah, it's always there's a little intuition in there as well.
When I always tell brokers, look, we're not the emotional ones. The buyer and sellers are the ones who are emotional. Why do we get emotional? Because we get some realtors who they get emotional, they get upset. Well, how is that going to come off when they're communicating to their client? It's like, stop, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones who are supposed to be emotional, not you.
No, it's true.
So in the midst of, right, you're having negotiations, multiple offers coming in, what about the 22 AD, right, the additional down? So how has that been used? Is there a strong way to use that? I know we had talked and there was one agent and that was essentially the only thing they were really looking at was that document. So maybe explain that to us, what it is.
Sure.
And how are you guys using that or not?
So the Form 22 AD, what that is a newer form. It was born about 2 years ago, and it was born out of the competitive market that was actually occurring on the west side of Washington when they were getting 50 offers for $100,000 over asking price. So the state gave birth to this Form 22 AD. And what it says is, so let's use east side numbers of like say 250. So the house is 250. Well, I'll pay 275 or 280. Well, the seller's getting excited, right? Ooh, yeah, I'm going to get more than the list price. Wait a second. The buyer's getting a loan. There's going to be an appraisal. It's not going to appraise at 280. What are we going to do? How is this going to work? So the AD gives the buyer the ability to say, I'll pay 280 and I have $30,000 extra that I'm writing on this form, which is now earmarked to contribute to this transaction if the appraisal comes in low, and in this case, up to $30,000 low. So again, somewhat risky for the buyer because you're basically showing your cards to the seller. I'll pay $250, but I have an extra $30,000. But in a competitive multiple offer market, you want the house? Do you want the house? Mm-hmm. So that's what the 22AD form allows us to do.
Mm-hmm. How is that played into the different offers for transactions you've all engaged with?
It wins them.
Yep.
I mean, that's just where it's at right now. I think like Ken broke that down real slow. And we also have to do that with our buyers because when we fill that form out, we say, okay, and this says you're going to waive up to $10,000 if the appraisal's short or whatever. They just go, okay. But what Ken's explaining is you've got your down payment, you've got your closing cost, and we're putting on the line these additional funds. Mm-hmm. One, do you have them? And you realize that means that you'll be putting that down additionally. Mm-hmm. Sometimes as realtors, we go over these forms every day and it's like second nature. We skip things. Man, it's the simplest things buyers don't realize. So having that conversation with our buyers and then letting the other realtor know, hey, we had this discussion. They understand what this means and they're willing to do this. That's big.
Yeah, or we haven't used that form before and now it's a new form to us as a realtor and maybe I don't understand it. Mm-hmm. So that always goes back to kind of the theme that we've talked about. Use a competent realtor. Mm-hmm. Not just, well, I'm using this person because they're a family friend.
Dude, I got to give a plug. Ken Sax's purchase and sale class.
I
take it multiple times a year.
I know. I'm taking it again in 2 months. Yeah. No, you do a really good. Yeah, that's a great plug. I like how you're just throwing plugs in here.
Yeah.
I love it because it is a really great class. You do
and
go
brokers
through,
get 7.5 clock hours.
Yes,
it's
we
a
need
win-win
that.
right there.
It's a win-win. But you just really, like you did just now, just break it down, just really smooth. And
Sure.
I think that communication, we're coming back into that again, is totally great. I think the 22AD is somewhat a plus if you have that extra cash. I mean, we're seeing a lot in the market with the first-time home buyers, and they don't. They barely have any cash, but they can afford what their rent is. And that's the unfortunate part about where we are in our market, unfortunately, that they can only afford $1,400, and that's a great little starter house, or 20, whatever, $1,700 a month. But now we've got an extra people like coming in, bringing in extra cash, and that's hard. So that's just one of the things. I mean, I'll use the 22AD if my client wants me to. Usually it comes from the agent. They'll also say that's important to my client is I want a 22AD, and if my person has that cash, I explain that to them, and then we're making that offer that direction.
And that big overlying concept that Tanya brought up was that first phone call is, hey, I've got clients who are interested. We're going to be writing an offer. Can you share with me some things that might be important to your sellers? A lot of times the realtor goes, well, what do you mean? Well, is close date important? Do they have another house under contract? What's that timing like? Any of those things, checking out the excluded items and if, now this is kind of a secret. Yes. So timing's super important when you're doing this. So if we know multiple offers are coming in on day one, you're pulling out the 22AD and they've got multiple days before they're going to review offers. Maybe you're the first one to have that conversation and now the realtor can bring that up to other people. So sometimes being first, getting in there, quick expiration date with an explanation of, sorry for the short expiration date on the offer, but we've been getting beat out on our offers. So tomorrow I'm scheduled to show them several homes. If we can get this answered tonight, I don't have to do that.
Right.
Man, that puts you in a lot better spot. So, but if that's not the case, if you're not bringing your strongest right away, if you're going to leg back, maybe you wait and you surprise them with, some of these things that we're talking about at the last minute, so that listing agent doesn't have a chance to share that with the other realtors.
Yeah,
There you go.
Kind of use that as your secret tool. I like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
You're seeing a lot in this market that agents are holding those houses all the way through the weekend. They're holding them 4 days because one of the sellers is traveling. You know,
Sure.
they just can't get to the thing. We're
Right.
making a decision on Monday afternoon. So when I open the MLS on Monday, I'm like, how many of these houses have already gone through the weekend and are already getting signed
Sure.
around? So having that 22 AD sometimes in the beginning can get you in there.
And that being said, sometimes sellers say, I want to wait till Monday, and it's Thursday or it's Friday. And ultimately, if we present an offer and they're showing the sellers, here's the it's up to the seller. The seller can sign that up. Agent promises, I'm going to wait till Monday.
Yes.
They can't promise
Right.
that. So it
Yes.
is really important to know that agent on the other side. Is that going to be the case? Is it worth the risk? Explain to your clients, here's the risk of us waiting. If a cash offer comes in tonight with an expiration, man, we're going to. So what do we want to do?
Right.
Yeah.
That's good. And really it's almost like a chess game. I mean, it's not just writing contracts. It's not just knowing the contracts, both important. It's not just communication, but it really comes down to a strategy of how do you take those extra little pieces and bring them all together. Are there any little secrets that you guys
Yeah,
would
Marc,
share? I mean,
share.
that was
Let's-
that was really valuable.
Well, I'm glad it's not chess because I'm not good at chess.
I love chess. Chess and baseball are my two favorite.
Yeah, man. I mean, going back to, I think the fundamentals is that communication, that relationship, the non-tangibles in prior to setting up that offer. And then there's, of course, every line item that we fill out on our purchase and sale agreement and the addenda. That's a negotiating strategy. Is shortening our home inspection period. Do we talk, your financing's that solid? Well, then let's do a limited financing waiver where we still have the right to do an appraisal, but if you lose your job, you're going to lose your earnest money. Each one of those boxes that we fill out, every one of those is negotiation. Delayed possession. What's our closing date? Who's the title and escrow? Man, competing offers and people are writing in.
Oh,
And it's like, man, you are not doing a service to your client.
Right.
Call the other realtor. What's important?
That's
Yeah.
like I notice like when they say I'm using so and so at so and so company, I'm just like
Awesome.
that's who we're using.
Right.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, I just had that conversation with the title company. You know, another one. I'm like, well, you know what? I just use who I can because I need the offer to be, you know, when I do shorten up almost all my inspections. You went to this. We're doing 5-day inspection. So to have a good solid inspector on your side to be able to be flexible. I have 3 and they just choose from one of them and all 3 of them know that they're pretty flexible with my time. And so I say, okay, we're going to do this. You know, it's almost like a puzzle piece. You just got to, okay, we're going to do that. So that's great, everyone.
Cool.
And Ken can probably recite the computation of time. The 5 days
Yes,
is not really
he
5
does.
days.
Yeah.
3 days
good.
is usually not 3
Let's
days.
talk
That's
about
right.
that real quick.
well, first, you know what I'm thinking and listening to you, Marc, is it's wisdom. It's
Right.
you know these tips and tricks and how you are successful comes from your experience. And it's like I tell people, right? You've heard me say, I'm not smarter than anybody else. It's just wisdom. It's I have learned by failing. And so it brings me back to the necessity of using an experienced, competent realtor who knows these things through experience and through wisdom.
And I do want to add one side note. Even though they've been experienced, they've been a long time, they might not be as good as playing chess or whatever, putting the pieces together, because there are some agents, you know, out there that have been there for 20-something years that just don't care. Just don't care. I run into that a lot. So just that
Absolutely.
experienced
They
agent.
may not have that wisdom.
Young agents still have it too. They're learning as quick as they
Yep,
can. All
yep,
the
yep,
training
yep,
at Keller
yep.
Williams.
Yep.
And it is that plugging in. It's like, I've read the forms over and over. I think I know what the forms are, but when you are immersed in a 7.5-hour class, you're looking at it from different angles. You're going through every line, and it means something different. So it really is. People don't go to those classes because they're busy. Like, we have stuff to do. But when you look around that class, a lot of the people, you'll see the same faces, and they're the top producers in the market center.
Are you giving another
Yeah.
plug to Ken's class?
I am.
Purchase
Yeah,
and
it's
sale?
so good.
I am.
Well, as our clients, their perception is we know the contract inside and out, and we're the expert on that contract. So I like to ask brokers, are you? Like, how well do you know it? And so, and a lot of realtors, they aren't really that competent with a lot of the addenda that we have, and especially the addenda that maybe you don't use very often.
Yeah, well, and that maybe to wrap this up here is so key. It's game time. When you're writing those offers, you have the client sitting across the table from you, to not have to think like, oh, what does that contract mean? Oh, what is that paragraph? But to actually have the confidence to be able to walk into that as an authority right off the bat, right? Like you're playing as a professional, not as an amateur, which automatically puts your clients well ahead of many of those other offers.
That's right.
So if you communicate, if you're not a jerk, if you understand your contract well, and you keep communicating, seems like you've got a pretty good opportunity for your clients. So thanks guys so much for your time. Thanks for watching this video, everyone, and we're looking forward to seeing you again at the next one. So have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching. Ask the host a question, recommend a guest, or check out any of our other programs on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Sponsored by Keller Williams Spokane.